cavern halls of Felsheim thrummed with a dangerous energy, the kind that could shatter stone as surely as any pickaxe. High Thane Bjornar stood on a jagged outcrop of rock overlooking the crowded chamber. Below him, a sea of miners seethed, their soot-streaked faces hard with defiance. Tools meant for labor, pickaxes, hammers, chisels, were clenched tightly, their dull gleam turning them into weapons of rebellion. Bjornar raised a hand, commanding silence. The crowd's shouts fractured into an uneasy murmur, though their stares burned with an undimmed intensity.
"Speak your grievance,"
Bjornar said, his voice ringing out over the echoing chamber. From the crowd stepped Grom Ruriksson, broad-shouldered and steady in his gait. He was no noble, but his raw authority had been forged through decades of backbreaking toil. His knuckles were scarred, his blond beard stained with soot, and his words, when they came, carried the weight of the crowd.
"My cousin was crushed last week,"
Grom began, his voice a hammer strike in the suffocating silence.
"The eastern shafts caved in. They were too narrow and too weak. He begged for reinforcements, but none came. Now he's entombed beneath the stone he broke to feed this mountain."
His gaze locked on Bjornar with an intensity that silenced even the murmurs behind him.
"How many more of us must die to feed your forges, High Thane? Do our lives weigh so little against the gold in your coffers?"
A ripple of anger surged through the crowd, their agreement tangible. Bjornar's fist tightened at his side, but he did not look away.
"You think I do not mourn the lost?"
he replied, his tone sharp and dangerous.
"Every stone carved, every ounce of ore hauled from these depths keeps Felsheim alive. If the forges go cold, the mountain dies, and with it, every dwarf who calls it home. Do not mistake necessity for indifference."
Grom scoffed, his voice laced with bitterness.
"Necessity? That's what you call this?"
He stepped closer, his words biting deeper with each breath.
"You are not him, Bjornar, and we all see it now. He walked these tunnels with us. He listened and cared for us. But you?"
Grom's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping into a cold sneer.
"You sit on your throne, high above the veins that feed you, blind to the cracks spreading beneath your feet. You'll never know what it means to truly lead. You will never be Balgrim, no matter how loud you roar."
The chamber bristled with tension. Bjornar's glare burned like molten steel.
"Enough!"
he thundered, his voice reverberating off the cavern walls. The guards flanking him stepped forward, their hands resting on axe hilts, the air taut with the threat of violence. But Bjornar raised a hand, halting them, his gaze locked on Grom, the weight of his fury compressed into a measured tone.
"You tread dangerously close to treason, Ruriksson,"
he growled.
"But you're right about one thing. I am not my father, and I will not lead in his shadow. You wish to speak for your people? Then speak to me, alone, dwarf to dwarf."
He pointed to a shadowed alcove carved into the cavern wall.
"Come."
Grom hesitated, his pride warring with the weight of the crowd's expectations. At last, he handed his pickaxe to a companion and stepped forward. The two dwarves disappeared into the shadows, their figures swallowed by the alcove. A tense, heavy silence gripped the chamber. The miners watched, the echoes of their confrontation lingering like an unspoken challenge. Somewhere deep in the mountain, the faint rumble of shifting stone reverberated, low and ominous, like a distant growl. The bells of Umbrasaur tolled, their mournful chime reverberating through the city of shadows. Cloaked in eternal twilight, the streets twisted like veins beneath a pale, silvery moon. Shadows danced across Gothic structures and cobblestone alleys, cast by lanterns whose flames flickered coldly, their light refusing to warm. A weighted mist clung to the streets, wrapping the city in a damp shroud that mirrored Corvin's mood as he trudged up the steep stone path toward the ebon sanctum. It had been years since he'd ventured into this part of the city, and for good reason. The seat of power always meant trouble, and trouble had a way of finding him. 2 Strigoi guards flanked the heavy rune-carved gates of the sanctum, their crimson cloaks swaying like spilled wine in the biting breeze. Their sharp, unblinking stares lingered as they pushed open the towering doors.
"You're late,"
one hissed.
"I don't remember agreeing to a schedule,"
Corvin muttered, brushing past them. Inside, the sanctum's vastness hit him like a chill. The vaulted ceiling vanished into the gloom, supported by columns carved with depictions of Moros, the god of death. The space radiated one purpose: to remind those who entered of their insignificance. At the far end of the candlelit hall stood Countess Vasilika, her presence commanding beneath a cluster of candelabras. She was younger than he expected, with sharp, angular features framed by short, raven-black hair. Her amber eyes, vibrant and piercing, marked her as a true-born Strigoi. Corvin stopped several paces short of her dais.
"If this is about a donation, you'll be disappointed. I barely have enough coin to keep a roof over my head."
Vasilika's piercing eyes regarded him with cool disinterest.
"You think I called you here for charity, Corvin?"
Let's just say I've never been a countess's first choice for a social call.
She descended the steps, her voice cutting through the still air.
"You're not here for your charm either, Relic Hunter. You're here because you've walked where others fear to tread."
Ex-relic hunter,
Corvin corrected.
"And you've got priests, scholars, and soldiers by the dozen. Why not bother one of them?"
"Because none of them understand the shadows like you do."
That gave him pause, but only for a moment. He turned his head slightly, feigning disinterest, pretending to examine the intricate depictions of death's cycle carved on a nearby column.
You're talking about the cathedral, aren't you? You nobles love your mysteries. But I've got better things to do.
"Spare me the deflections. Tell me what you know,"
she said, her probing gaze daring him to lie.
Very little,
Corvin replied, his voice casual.
"Just whispers. Care to enlighten me?"
Her voice dropped, the weight of her words filling the air.
"My priests have been collapsing during their rituals, their minds shattered by something beyond understanding. Not from what they see in the veil, but from some conflict pressing against it, trying to break through."
Corvin frowned but said nothing, his rebellious facade cracking slightly.
"The Cathedral of the Hollow Crown,"
she continued.
"If anyone can make sense of what's happening there, it's you."
And if I say no?
Vasilika's lips curved into the faintest smile.
"You won't, because deep down, you've never been able to walk away from the unknown."
Corvin's jaw tightened. He hated her for knowing that. Even more so, he hated her for being right.
Fine,
he muttered, the words clipped.
I'll take a look. But don't expect me to enjoy it.
"I don't care if you enjoy it,"
Vasilika said as she turned away.
"Only that you succeed."
Above Illyrian, the skies radiated a perfect light, their shimmering expanse unbroken save for the piercing beams that rained down in quiet majesty. The land below mirrored this brilliance, its rolling fields and crystalline rivers embodying the eternal harmony of Oristel's blessing. For most, it was a vision of divine perfection, but to Keltharion, it was an empty spectacle, a mirror reflecting the cracks in his once hallowed spirit. The golden fields of Luminara, once vibrant and rich with life, now seemed muted to his weary eyes. Their beauty felt hollow, as though the land itself recoiled from the burden he carried. His dulled armor bore the scars of travel and time, its weight pressing down on him like the judgment he couldn't escape. Lucerius's steady gait echoed in the stillness of the fading day, the only sound against the heavy silence. For weeks, Keltharion had traversed the vast landscape of his homeland, driven not by hope, but by the relentless sting of betrayal. Months ago, the oracle's voice had cleaved through the fabric of his dreams, sharp and resolute, as unforgettable as the moment he first pledged his sacred oath.
Save the village, or its ruin will cast a shadow across Illyrian.
Without question, he had heeded her call, mustering his brethren to defend Orenswatch, a quiet hamlet tucked near the fringes of the realm. The foe was not the ancient horrors of his ancestors' legends, but radicals, wayward Aasimar, emboldened by whispers of Illyrian's faltering supremacy. Caltharian's blade had brought swift deliverance, his resolve shielding the innocent. Yet in saving them, he had unknowingly paid a price that would haunt him. The Radiant Council had condemned his defiance. The village was deemed unworthy, a distraction from greater threats. In saving it, Caltharian had defied their will, and for this, they branded him a failure. His title was stripped, his sacred blade taken, and he was cast from the order he had dedicated his life to serving. Now, every grueling step toward the oracle's sanctuary fed the fire of resentment smoldering in his chest. Her guidance had led him to ruin, yet, despite the bitter taste of her betrayal, some small part of him clung to the hope that she held answers that could justify the cost. The silhouette of the mountain emerged in the distance, a jagged monolith that clawed at the twilight sky, its sheer cliffs promising no mercy. Lucerius shifted, his silvery coat gleaming faintly in the dimming sunlight. The stallion had been a faithful partner through the vales of misted woods, the fury of untamed rivers, and the desolation of sun-scorched plains. But this ascent, Caltharian knew, was a trial he alone must face. Caltharian swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching against the hardened ground. Turning to his steadfast companion, he ran a hand along Lucerius's silken mane.
"You've carried me further than I deserve, old friend,"
he murmured, the words heavy with unspoken gratitude. Resting his forehead briefly against the steed's mane, he whispered,
"Wait here. If I fail to return, don't linger for ghosts."
Lucerius huffed, his keen eyes locking onto his master with an almost knowing unease, as though questioning the wisdom of the journey's final steps. Caltharian turned away, his gaze fixing on the ancient cairn that marked the path's beginning. Its weathered stones, etched with sigils of pilgrims and penitents long past, seemed to whisper of trials endured and truths uncovered. He ran his gloved fingers across the grooves, the cold stone a stark contrast to the fire burning within his heart. The path ahead, a narrow scar carved into the rock, twisted upward with merciless defiance. Each step would demand strength, but the storm within him, doubt clashing with fury and a faint ember of hope, was the greater trial. Caltharian took his first step forward, the weight of his past falling away behind him. Mont Orivane rose above, its jagged peaks etched against the sky like an accusation, a challenge, and a promise of reckoning.